Good evening, everyone. I hope this message finds you fit and fine. My name is Shashank Tyagi, and I welcome you all to Study IQ. Please confirm that my voice is fine. Great. So, today we have to discuss Iran's nuclear deal as it is in news again, right? So, this is going to be our lecture flow. First, we are going to understand the issue. What is this Iran nuclear deal? Why it is important? The timeline. What is the background? What kind of restrictions are being placed on Iran? And why continuously, again and again, Iran is flouting that? What is the reality in there? Is it is it real that uh, that Iran is the one who is escalating the crisis, or there are some prominent narratives of West which are supported by US, which are dominating the media? So we need to understand this. Since this is an important topic of geopolitics, I must give you one advice. You should never start any understanding any topic by having binary setup in mind. It means it is not about who is right, who is wrong. It is not about good or bad. It is about how, in broad spectrum, this international politics work. The point you realize the various factors which influence decisions of these nations, then you will be understanding these topics with much clarity, I would say. So we need to understand the current scenario, impact on India and the world, and then conclusion. So this is in news. What it might take for the Iran nuclear deal to be revived. First, we need to understand what is the status of this deal as of now. So this deal was signed. Welcome Anupam, welcome Senku, welcome Avgunshi. It's fine. Thanks for confirming. So this deal was signed in 2015, and this deal was signed by P5 plus 1, permanent 5 plus 1. So let's make this session interactive. It should not be like some pravachan on this Iran nuclear deal, because you have gone through the articles and this topic many times. So let's give some more advantage to you when it comes to understanding this topic. Okay. So have you ever questioned why P5 plus 1 nations are the signatory of this JCPOA and not other nations? Was this initiative of countering Iran's nuclear establishment or nuclear escalation was started by United Nations Security Council, permanent five members? Or these initiatives were taken somewhere else? What's your take on this? Come on, in comments. Any guess? Because I'm interested in, to tell you what's the status as of now and why Germany is there. Germany is not part of permanent five. Why Germany is there? Why this one is added there? What's the significance of it? So I'm looking at your comments. What do you think? Any guess? So this initiative was not taken by permanent five members. This initiative of checking the nuclear, you can say, adventures of Iran was actually started by EU3 nations. When I say EU3, I mean France, Germany, and UK. So these three nations were the one who were concerned that if Iran is nuclearized, then it will create security dilemma for these European powers. So it was initiative of these powers. Later, when there was there were reports that Iran has, you can say, flouted some norms of NPT, and then later then when report was actually filed by IAEA, then it was quite clear that now Iran has some centrifuges which were not allowed, and it is a matter of international security now. It is not just a matter of regional security, it is a matter of international security now. And that's why the other permanent five member nations, you can say now permanent five nation, came into picture. You know that other means now China, Russia, and US. Now they came into picture. So three were earlier, now three more came into picture, and these three and two, France and UK, they collectively are part of United Nations Security Council. So that's how this P5+1 arrangement is made. Now coming to what is the status of deal now? So it was signed in 2015. Then what happened? So in 2018, Donald Trump said, I'm not going to follow this deal. And it was not due to some reports which he got during his tenure as US president. It was his election promise also. During his election promise, he told clearly that this JCPOA is worst deal ever. Now the point is, why he was making this as an election agenda? What is its significance with electoral politics of America? What do you think? Come on, let's make this session more interactive. I don't want to engage into some pravachans. Because when you are going to interact, I'll be able to understand what kind of doubts you may have. This is a rule of psychology. When you make a mistake and you get the answer, you get corrected right at that particular point, then there are less chances that you are going to forget about it. What do you think? Reason is that Iran is considered as adversary, or you can say is having adversarial relation with its neighbor, prominently Saudi Arab, and is considered as threat for Israel. And Israel, Iran considered Israel as threat for them. And what is common in Israel and Saudi Arab? They have a strong ally, a strong friend, that is US. Right? And Israel has a strong Jewish presence, especially in finance market of USA. So that is why from the start, from the establishment of Israel, you have seen who has been backing Israel. It was US. So if some nation is an existential threat to Israel, then definitely any alliance, any treaty which has been made by a previous government, it means Obama government, then opposition party means Donald Trump is going to question that. Right? I hope it is quite clear. Now what is happening now? So is it that if Donald Trump goes back from the TT, this particular arrangement, does it mean that whole arrangement goes down? Means US is one power. What about other five? Means B5+1, there are six now. So that was the question which was raised by other European powers, other signatories. Prominently France, Germany and UK, they were saying that USA cannot disband this treaty unilaterally. If we all were the one who agreed on this arrangement, then how can US unilaterally disband it without discussing with us? So they said, no, if Iran goes with the arrangement, goes with the promises which were made at JCPOA, then we are going to uphold our part of promise. Even if USA backs out, we are going to follow the promises which were made to Iran. And what promises were they? The promises of, you can say, the lowering of the sanctions which were leveled against Iran. Because there were many economic sanctions, political sanctions against Iran, and that was a severe hit to the economy of Iran, and there was, inflation, less economic growth, joblessness. So these kind of tactics are used so that domestic pressure can be created in Iran on the regime. Means if people are jobless, if people are facing high inflation, then definitely they're going to question their regime. They're going to question their leaders. And then for the political reality, for sustaining their rule, The leadership will bow down before the Western powers that, oh, we have severe domestic crisis. Now we are going to agree. Okay, so you were saying you want to check our nuclear establishment. We are agreeing on that. So these kind of tactics or these kind of arrangements were expected from these, you can say, sanctions. So now the point is, even if European powers were backing JCPOA, but Donald Trump knew the power of USA, the economic might USA have in international financial system. And you should know that we do not have any world government, right? International order is anarchic. The way you have government at the level of nation where there are fixed rules, right? There are rules, there are laws. If you don't follow that law, there's a proper mechanism for punishment, right? So that law and order can be established. But we don't have same kind of order or same kind of government at international level. So in this manner, USA tried to project itself as a global policeman. And this is backed by certain scholars like who support this hegemonic stability theory. But hegemonic stability theory, it simply means, because you don't have any world government, you need one hegemon. You need one nation who is going to rule this world in a manner so that it is for the betterment of everyone. So those scholars who support this idea that US hegemony is good for everyone, they use this analogy that consider that only one person is having trigger in his hand. And this person is responsible for bringing order. So there is more probability that this person will be successful. But if same trigger is in hand of say 5-6 other people, and all are given responsibility that you have to bring order before in these say 20-30 people, and now more people have this trigger, so don't you think this will create more security dilemma? If more people have trigger in their hand, they have gun in their hand, and in my example, gun represents power. So what is going to happen? Then it will be a threat to the security of the world, because you never know what can happen next. Right? Those who agree mention agree. Now, coming back to this point, now objective of this JCPOA is to limit the nuclear program of Iran. Because as US backed out and US categorically said these economic sanctions are leveled against Iran, and whoever is our ally, if they engage with Iran in this manner, then they are going to face sanctions too, because we consider Iran as a threat to US security. Then many nations backed out from the trade with Iran. So now Iran as a reply, Iran started its, restarted its program at a much faster rate. Now let's go to the timeline of these developments, from where the story of Iran and nuclear power started. So it started from 1953, when US President Eisenhower, he delivered a speech in UN General Assembly, and the core phrase of that speech was atoms of peace. But it was not the real start. The story goes back to World War II, when in 1945, US used nuclear bombs against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After that, nuclear technology became taboo of world politics. And US got a bad name. And after 1945, if we analyze the foreign policy of US and we compare how US policy was changed after World War II, if we compare with before World Wars, even World War I. So we have seen that before these world wars and even in interwar period, US was following a policy of isolation from world politics. US was more focused on their internal developments. But after 1945, and this process started from the World War itself, that we have seen that now US wants to set the table of world politics according to itself. Means US wanted its national interest to be the prominent one, and this world war has given that vacuum. You know, whenever there is a vacuum, when I say vacuum, it means there are some gaps, there is a need of some power to bring order, to bring support. So this vacuum was filled by US in terms of Marshall Plan for EU. So US was in, you can say, in journey to actually whitewash its past, to rise above the taboo which it was carrying. Because you cannot become superpower just by having military backup or economic might. You also need goodwill. A goodwill by which other parts are going to support your rise. And my friends, you do not become powerful by some efforts you made in a particular area, say military or economic area. Geopolitics, which is the core, point of discussion around Iran here, geopolitics plays a vital role. You have geography, but you have to use that geography for your advantage, and this is what US was using after that. So US knew that I have technology, I have nuclear technology, some other parts have nuclear technology. Let's stop this journey here. As world was saying that this nuclear technology has only brought harm to the world, then US said, now I'm going to bring peace through this technology. And how they're going to bring peace? They were saying that no other nation need to invest in making these nuclear, you can say, nuclear arms. So if US give this advice, then other nations would ask, you have made this nuclear arm and you are saying we should not make this. Why should we accept your proposal? Right? Why should we accept your proposal? Then US should give some reply. So US said, you should accept my proposal because I have something to offer you which you cannot refuse. Same, Godfather style. Then these nations, for example, Iran asked, so what is the proposal? US said proposal is that you are going to invest heavily in order to create some nuclear bombs. Yeah, some nuclear tech. But what is its use? You're not going to use it regularly. It is not going to solve the problems which you have in your, say, energy sector. Right? So I'm going to give you technology for civil nuclear use. It means I'm going to give you nuclear technology, but for peaceful purpose. Then these nations were elated. इससे अच्छा क्या हो सकता है? Okay, we accept it. But every offer has certain conditions. And condition was that you should not enrich uranium beyond this point. It means you should not chalk the path for making nuclear weapons. And they agreed, okay, we are not going to make nuclear weapons. So this is how this atoms peace program of US started. And Iran became a partner, Iran signed. Now, it is important for us to understand what was happening in domestic politics of Iran at that point of time, because at that point of time, Iran and US were close. They were not adversaries like they are now. So at that point of time, Iran was having secular monarchy. And secular itself tells a lot to you, right? US and other Western powers, they considered secularism as their core credential when it comes to their politics, right? And this was secular monarchy. And more than this, the Shahs of Iran were also considered as puppets of US. So it was favorable for Iran as well as US, right? But later, what happened? That we saw a regime change. Regime change, it means it was Shia Islamic revolution by Ayatollah Khamenei, and which changed the whole picture of geopolitics of Middle East. This revolution was not a revolution of one nation. This occurred in one nation, but it was having ripple effect in different parts of the world. Now it was not secular monarchy, now it was an Islamic state based on Shia ideas of Ayatollah Khamenei. He has interpreted his idea of state, his idea of government, and that is what became the prominent idea at that point of time. And we have seen that in between this development, means before this revolution, Iran got a lot of development backed by this technology which was given by US. So did Iran gain something from this Atoms of Peace program? Yes, Iran gained. Iran gained in agriculture, service sector, atomic energy and radiation industry, production of source material for different atomic industries. So Iran gained. But as Ayatollah Khamenei came to the picture, things changed. Later, it was found that Iran has installed its own Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, where there was enrichment going on. But at that time, it was not quite clear whether this is going to be a weapon grade enrichment or not. So those who are wondering what is this enrichment sir talking about, we're going to come to it. In 1985, Iran, Syria, Libya, they discussed about developing nuclear weapons. Now you're observing a change. What was happening? So you need not to cram the ears, but you need to understand the chronology. You need to understand what was going on in this story, how one thing was leading to other. So in 1985, Iran, Syria, Libya, they discussed, no, we need to develop nuclear weapons because we are having threat from Israel, because Israel was investing heavily in its defense infrastructure, right? And Israel was doing it for obvious reason, because none of Arab neighbor wanted Israel to be established there, right? So it is said that the only way Israel had to invest heavily on this defense establishments. So Iran considered, Syria and Libya considered, they need to now focus on nuclear weapon because it was a condition of security dilemma for them, right? And that's when Iran acquired technical schematics for building P1 centrifuge from Abdul Qadir Khan. And in this story, this Abdul Qadir Khan is of importance too. He's a Pakistani scientist who was working in a UK-based company who was having establishment in Netherlands, Germany. So he was working in Germany. And this particular company was making centrifuges for civil nuclear purposes, means for making nuclear reactors, for producing this power. But at that point of time, this Abdul Qadir Khan is said to stole some of the drafts, some of the plans of making these enrichment centrifuge, and he came back to Pakistan. And it is said that Iran struck a deal with Abdul Qadir Khan of worth $3 million, and he passed on this technology to enrich this uranium till weapon grade to Iran. So here you can see this schematic where centrifuge is there. So this is a model of centrifuge, means uranium fed into centrifuge as a gas. Uranium hexafluoride gas is put into the centrifuge. It's like a cylinder. Then it rotates, this cylinder rotates. And due to the centrifugal force, what happens? The uranium-238 is separated from uranium-235. So due to this, and due to this this centrifugal force and this differentiation, then enrichment process starts. So uranium-238, it falls at the bottom and is removed, and uranium-235 floats at the top and it is collected. Because as this motor rotates, then heat is generated, and you know the principle of convection, the lighter particles, because uranium-235 lighter than uranium-238, so it moves upwards, and that's how it got enriched, right? So a prominent use of gas centrifuge is for the separation of uranium-235, 238, as I told you. Now, US passed Iran-Iraq Arms Non-Proliferation Act and Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, because now US got this hint that there is something cooking up between these nations, and they are investing in developing nuclear weapons. And if they develop nuclear weapons, then it is going to be, you can say, threat to US interest in Middle East, because Saudi Arab and Israel are allies, and stability in Middle East was vital for oil supply of the world, and US was also thinking about its own energy needs, right? So it did not want it that this adventure towards nuclear weapon lead to some crisis in its own economy. And at the same point of time, what happened in 2002, a dissident group, Mujahideen-e-Khalq. So Mujahideen-e-Khalq was a group within Iran which was against Ayatollah Khamenei's rule. And I hope it is quite clear to you that if Ayatollah Khamenei's or this Shia Islamic regime is against US, so whoever is against this Ayatollah Khamenei's rule within Iran is going to be the natural ally of US. The basic rule, your enemy's enemy is your friend. So now this enemy's enemy, Mujahideen-e-Khalq, they gave report that there are two sides, Natanz and Arak. I hope these are visible to you on your screen. So they said that Iran is building nuclear facilities there, and US and world powers should keep a check there. So in the next year, 2003, IEA launched an investigation on Iran's nuclear facilities, and here Iran was exposed. And when Iran was exposed, then other member nations also got, other member nations of UNSC, they also got sensitive about this, that this can actually, destabilize this Middle East and create several problems, right? So it was clear in 2004 that Iran has violated the terms which were mentioned in NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. Proliferation का मतलब ही होता है that you are not going to go for the weapon grade enrichment of uranium, and in exchange you are getting this civil nuclear technology for peaceful purpose. Civil itself means you are going to use it for peaceful purpose. At the time, Russia and Iran had this agreement that Russia is going to supply uranium to Iran for civil purpose, and the other, the radioactive waste can also be used to produce weapon grade. So Russia tried to put Iran into clarity before the other Western powers that Russia is engaging, and there's no immediate harm which is going to happen. Iran in 2005 actually producing this uranium hexafluoride in this facility. And at this point of time, France, Germany, and UK halt negotiations with Iran. Or now you can connect with the story. EU three nations, France, Germany, UK, they were the one who started this negotiation process with Tehran, that you should stop this escalation of nuclear weapon, and we are going to help you decrease the sanctions which are against you, because you are creating threat to other member nations. But as Tehran was going on, why Tehran was doing this? Because Tehran was concerned about its own security. Iran was concerned about its own security from Israel. And we are living in a world where sovereignty of nation state is considered prominent, right? Autonomy of state is considered prominent. Whenever other powers are going to tell you what you should do, what you should not do, it is considered against the interest of that nation, right? So in 2006, because of Iran's non-compliance with its NPT, United Nations Security Council demanded suspension of Iran's enrichment program. And there, IAEA, it came into picture more strongly than ever before. So in Western agencies, they discovered another secret nuclear facility at Fordo. Fordo is there in your map, with a capacity of 3,000 centrifuges. And at this point in 2009, then Obama thought, now I need to engage into one-to-one talk with Hassan Rouhani. So at that time, they talked clearly. What are your concerns? What are the kind of security dilemma you are having? Let's find a interim agreement. Let's find a solution in between. So announces. Iran said clearly that US cannot tell us what we should do with our establishment and what we should not do. Iran said, it is my sovereignty that I want to engage into nuclear technology. And I'm clearly saying that no other power need to get threatened. This is just for our own security. But this was not a satisfactory reply for US and other Western powers, and that is why they wanted something more strong, more, you can say, crude. So Iran announces that it started its enrichment to near 20% for that, so that they can be more relaxed, because 20% is way less than the weapon grade material. In 2013, Iran and UNSC, means P5 plus Germany. I told you why Germany is in picture, because Germany was the one, EU3, who started this negotiating process. So they reached an interim agreement. It means temporarily curbing Tehran's nuclear program and unfreezing some Iranian assets. When I say Iranian assets, because Iranian companies were having their assets, their resources in different nations. Iran was also having different assets in different nations. They were freezed. And what was the idea which was going on in 2013? These Western nations thought, if we can halt Iran's program for some time, then we can actually delay the development of weapon grade uranium for at least 1 year. If we can delay this development for 1 year, and we ever get a signal that Iran is again developing, then we at least have adequate time to respond. So purpose of this 2013 of interim agreement was to actually take a leverage of time so that they can give an adequate response. Now in 2015, Iran conducted its first ballistic missile test. And ballistic missile test, it means projectile, means which is having the capability to hit the target at longer, you can say, distance. So it was a clear signal that Israel, now you should not think that Iran cannot do anything against you. You are in our reach. So at this point of time, repetitive sanctions, energy, finance sector, diplomatic negotiations strategy made Iran to sign JCPOA, because domestic crisis started building up due to these economic and financial sectors. The money which many of these companies, Iranian companies, were having in other banks, they were freezed. International transactions were stopped. So that was the one way to actually put pressure on Iran. And in January 2016, IAEA acknowledged Iran that Iran has met its commitment under nuclear deal and lifted most of the sanctions on Iran. Now, what was the benefit? Benefit was Iran re-enters the global banking system. It means transaction between the companies of Iran and other countries. They begin selling crude oil and natural gas on the international market, which is the prime source of revenue for the Iran. Now, the next day, US imposed sanctions over Iran's ballistic missile test. Now, this was a kind of surprise for Iran, that if IAEA has clearly said that we are following the commitment, then why you are actually putting sanctions against us? Now, at this point, let me give you the speech which Joe Biden has given recently, which was in last day's newspaper, Indian Express. So Joe Biden has mentioned 3 points. Number one, he said that US is ready to come back on the table and accept Iran nuclear deal, but Iran should accept the commitments which were part of original deal, because the point Donald Trump dismantled the deal from US side, Iran in response also escalated its efforts in ballistic missile, in nuclear development, and proxy wars in Middle East. So having this concern, so he has reached 3 points. Number one, you should accept the original conditions. Number two, you should find a solution to mellow down your ballistic missile projects. So number three, you should stop proxy wars across, your adversaries and, Middle East, because it is creating security dilemma for many of the US allies. Now, on this part, the reply from Iran is, we are ready for the point number one. It means the point which we agreed upon in JCPOA, we are agreeing on that. But when it comes to ballistic missile development and this proxy wars, USA cannot bound us. And by this means, it's not like Iran is accepting that we are engaged into proxy war. It is just that they are telling that our sovereignty matters. This agreement is between equals. US is not unilateral power who is going to determine what we should do, what we should not do. Because if Israel is investing in missiles, even making this as an important source of their revenue, means exporting defense equipments, then how can US actually tie down us or tie down our growth? Just because they feel insecure, they have security dilemma with Iran. So this is the point which has raised recently. Now, in January, now going back to the story, 2017, Iran test fires a medium-range ballistic missile in defiance of UN Security Council resolution. And why Iran did that? I hope it is quite clear. Because there were some sanctions which were not because Iran was thinking that it is the, you can say, it is the sovereignty of Iran that Iran can invest in ballistic missiles. But US and these Western powers were saying that ballistic missiles might be used as carrier of these nuclear attacks or nuclear bombs. So that is why Iran was saying, no, this was not the part of the deal. It was not mentioned that I cannot actually progress in or invest in medium-range ballistic missile, right? But at that point of time, Donald Trump said it is against a dilemma for the regional stability and the stability of the at international level. So that's why he said Iran is a threat of highest level, and that is why US is dismantling this deal. And at this point of time, what is happening now? Now, Western diplomats have set a deadline of later this month to revive 2015 Iran nuclear deal so that Iran can de-escalate its development, which was signed under Barack Obama. And Joe Biden has raised these 3 points, which I've just told you. Now, Iran has rejected any deadline imposed by West. Iran is saying we are not going to go by the deadline which you tell us, right? President Ibrahim Raisi has said that regional and missile issues are non-negotiable. Because Biden has said you have to stop proxy wars. President Ibrahim Raisi are saying these are not proxy wars. These are our regional issues. If we have some conflicts with some of the members of Middle East, then it is our sovereignty that we can actually exercise ways which we want. How can you tell us what we need to do? So as of now, this is going on. And as I told you, you should not look at geopolitics with binary, that who is right, who is wrong, because what Iran is doing is from the perspective what is in the interest of Iran for security, economic and other factors. Geopolitical standing of Iran in Middle East is also important here. But when it comes to US, what US is doing, it is purely for the national interest of US and other Western nations. So it means nothing is right, nothing is wrong in international politics. What matters is national interest. This is realist perspective. So there are different perspectives to look at international relations. So realists say this is what is the reality. But do you think this is the only way we can conduct international relations? Do you think wars are necessary? Do you think it is important to invest in these nuclear bombs? There's no other way out for peace? These are the kind of questions which are there from the time immemorial. We have some scholars who say that actually it is not necessary that international relations are bound by war. ऐसा नहीं है that war are going to happen. Man has made war. We have created this idea that since there is no government at international level, then we have to go for power politics. And whatever gives power to us, we have to invest it, be it military articles, be it economic power to arm twist other nations. So these scholars, for example, ideally say that there can be peace in the world. Liberal institutionalism says that. You can remember these keywords. Liberal institutionalism says that. You can use this in essay also. Says that if there are institutions strong enough to uphold law and order, then there can be peace at international level. And there are other perspectives, which are social constructivist. They say that everything is construction by society. It means we were born as humans on this earth. And every other thing, these boundaries, these territories, these weapons, this necessity to fight, these are created by humans in this society. If we have created this, for example, gravity, if this pen is dropping like this, we cannot change it. This is a fact of nature. But if wars are happening, if you are considering your national interest before humanity, then this is your construction. This is construction of humans. This is social construction. This is social constructivist view says. And if this is construction of society, international society, then we can definitely change it. Then how we can actually change it? Then social constructivist, for example, Carl Deutsch, he says that it can change by communication. Carl Deutsch says that it can change by communication. They say that major threat perceptions in the world are because of communication gaps and the misunderstandings which are continuously created. The money which could have been invested in health, education, development, other developmental sectors are being invested in weapons. And these weapons are filling the pockets of only few rich weapon makers, these companies. And sometimes these companies are selling weapons to both the nations who are fighting war. Sometimes these companies are selling weapons to the nation, the government, as well as terrorists. So my friends, this world and this reality is created by ideas we believe in. And by changing the ideas we believe in, we can change the world too. Now, coming back to this topic, because I wanted to give you some analysis so that you can think beyond what is written in your article, in your newspapers, that this is the deal and this is happening. Because I tell you that international relation is not just about understanding what is happening. International relation is about having broad understanding why things happen this way. What are the different perspectives on this? And how we can alter these things. Now, deal and restrictions. So what US and other, these P5+1 nations are proposing. Okay, what is in the deal? So they say you have to reconfigure heavy water reactor so that Iran cannot produce plutonium, which can be used for weapon. So you can easily remember it. Reconfigure the heavy water reactor. Then in heavy water reactor you have centrifuges, right? So limitation on the number of centrifuges Iran can run, because centrifuges are used for enrichment, right? I just showed you. So Iran was restricted to an older and slower model, so that Iran's development actually gets slower. If at any point of time you get a hint, oh, Iran can attack or Iran is in the process of development, then you can respond to that by sanctions or IAEA restrictions, intervention. Now, conversion of Fordo enrichment site into research center and greater inspection access of IAEA inspector. So clearly saying you need to start with heavy water reactor, right? reconfigure it, then within it you are using centrifuges, put a limitation on it, and when it comes to this whole site, Fordo site, change it into research center. And whether you are doing this or not, all three things, whether you are doing this or not, we are going to put IAEA for inspection. So this is real, and these are the restrictions, major restrictions. And in return, what Iran is going to get? First of all, removal of economic sanctions, which is much needful for Iran. Iran could purchase commercial aircraft and do business globally, because no nation can survive without trade, without production, without service, because we need resources to survive, right? World powers unfroze billions of dollars Iran had overseas, like I told you. So many accounts of Iran government, Iran establishments, Iran companies have across the world, they were frozen. Now they can use that if this deal is revived and all the sanctions are removed. 15 years after the deal, these restrictions on Iranian uranium enrichment will end, as many JCPO restrictions have expiry dates. And my friends, US and some sections in US have serious apprehensions on this 15-year period. It means it is not forever. But why 15 years are mentioned? So that Iran can be on the table. If you forever put a restriction, then why would some nation sign? It is actually like giving away the sovereignty, the power to take decision for yourself on the whims and fancies of other nations. So that is why 15-year was a middle ground which was reached. So over the years, I told you, Iranian economy has survived, or you can say suffered, with recession, currency depreciation, inflation, and this particular deal can actually save things for Iran. Now, what is the current scenario? I told you that Trump has actually brought restrictions against sanctions, restrictions against Iran, and this escalated the things for Iran, right? Initially, Iran found some partners, and Iran even reached out to India to continue this oil import. And India continued for some time because we were in exception category. But then Trump administration tightened the process further, and many of the buyers of Iran crude oil stepped back or changed the importers. At that point of time, there was one mechanism which was developed, Instex. So Instex is like you can say, barter system, which was beyond sanctions. Beyond sanctions means even US and other powers allowed that Iran can give crude oil in return of food and medicine. Because if Iran is given money in any currency, say international prevalent currency, say US dollar, then this can be used in weaponry to purchase things which are necessary for these programs. But if food and medicine, these are necessary for humanitarian ground, this exception was given. Now this is a famous development. I hope at that point of time you have seen that USA declared that Islamic Revolutionary Guard of Iran, the security force of Iran, is a terrorist group. And in one of the attack, US assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the prominent general of Iran. And at that point of time, Iran announced that it will no longer limit uranium enrichment. And Iran started construction of centrifuge production center at Natanz to replace the one it had destroyed months earlier. In the attack, it was blamed on Israel because Israel destroyed one of the centrifuge production center. It is said that. So now Iran announced new restrictions on the IAEA's ability, because in the deal, USA backed out, and EU members said, if you take care of the promises which you did, then we are going to taking care of the promises we are doing. So in that promise, IAEA was inspecting the nuclear sites regularly. But now Iran said these accesses are no longer be available, right? These inspection facilities are no longer be available to this IAEA, and it creates a kind of, you can say a panic kind of situation in some sections that, it means now war is near. Now, impact on India and the world. First of all, you know that Iran is an important player in oil market. And if restrictions are on Iran, it will reduce the supply of oil in national market. And if supply side is actually hit, then definitely it will lead to a rise in price. And you know that India is import dependent economy, and the primary, you can say, crude oil is a big contributor to that. So it is going to have an negative impact on the, you can say, economy side of India, right? It can trigger inflation, right? Other side is, if Iran is not allowing IAEA, it will further create security dilemma, and it will create a nuclear threat to the neighborhood of Iran, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia. And EU powers are also concerned that if Iran is nuclearized to this level and Iran is not bound by any deal, then they think this is a security concern for themselves. And when it comes to India, India has invested heavily in this Chabahar project, and Iran is crucial for India's outreach to Central Asia. Central Asia is rich in natural gas. Central Asia is a potential market for India's Make in India campaign. And that's why Iran is strategically important. Although the Taliban rise in Afghanistan is a debacle for India in this context, but my friends, investments are done taking into consideration what opportunities India can take, benefit of 50 years or 100 years from now, right? Immediate benefits are not taken into consideration, or immediate, you can say, developments should not be taken as a defeat when it comes to diplomacy. Now, as a conclusion, what we can say? We can conclude that both US and Iran should reconsider the posturing they are having, US with regard to sanctions, Iran with regard to nuclear development. And here, Russia-China angle should also be seen. What if, considering the US and China gap, China come into the aid of Iran, Russia come into the aid of Iran, considering this Ukraine crisis? So these scopes should taken into consideration, and middle way should be, should be found. And apart from this, a lot has changed in few years when it comes to Middle Eastern politics. Earlier, these Arab nations were considering Israel as their permanent enemy. But I hope that you have gone through the developments with regard to Abraham Accord. It means this is a signal that things are changing in Middle East. So if things are changing in Middle East, we should buy new spectacles to see the geopolitics in Middle East. So at this point of time, I declare my session complete, and thanks for being here. So see you in the next session. Till then, keep learning, keep growing. Shashank Tyagi signing off.